A lot of stories you'll read, and indeed a lot of the comics you'll read, are designed to be inclusive. Big superhero books are mostly all about expansive worlds, big fights, larger-than-life good guys, and over-the-top villains. Take a flick through one and you'll see what I mean. Material is a mini-series by Alice Cott and Will Tempest that follows 4 different narratives: an actress addicted to drugs, a university professor, a student protester, and a former prisoner of Guantanamo Bay. This is a book not about being larger than life, but about the minutiae, about these characters struggling to understand their place and what anything means. And one of its primary themes seems to be isolation. It permeates through the book, and there's a feeling that Alice Cott and Will Tempest create masterfully in the first issue. You're watching Strip Panel Naked, I'm Haas, and I'm going to show you some of the cool stuff lurking in the pages of some of the best comics. So Material creates this sense of isolation, and that's what I wanted to look at in this episode. There's a few elements both through Cott's writing and Tempest's art that go into creating the effect, and it's really intertwined, because you can't really talk about what Tempest is doing in the panels without also talking about how Cott is breaking down the plotting and beats in the pages. But the first main thing you notice when reading Material is how simple the in-page structure actually is. Breaking it down, there's not much to it at all in terms of the formal approach. We're dealing with the standard 9-panel grid, and we've talked a bit about that before with the Omega Men episode linked here, but a 9-panel grid adds a level of simple rigidness to the book. It gives you panels that are taller than they are wide, which limits expansive space, and it actually contains the visuals quite dramatically. Tempest and Cott aren't afraid to open some of that space up, like at the top of this second page here. Before we talk about that, let's just focus on these regular panels in the grid. For the most part, they only contain one of two things. It's either a person talking or a faceless crowd. When we're dealing with shots of the Professor, we see him, again, one of two ways. The first is from a distance, made to look small. We actually open the page in the whole comic with this sequence of 3 panels where we move past the Professor and end the row on the 3rd panel with him pretty small in the frame, just this black expanse behind him. This is emphasised again in the final panel of the page where you can't even see the Professor, he's just this small silhouette. Again, the next page opens up with him small, tucked away in this larger panel. And the other way we see him is worried, and clearly old. Tempest renders him not with a smile but with frown lines, his face often contorted. His clothes are a little bit wrinkled and loose, like his undone shirt under the jumper. It's fair to say he looks a little bit scruffy. And only once do we see him in the same panel as anyone else, the larger wide panel at the top of this second page. But in this instance, everyone is silhouetted, there's not any real features of any people to be made out, it just creates the idea of people. And these elements all feed into that isolation, right? Because when do we see the Professor join up with anyone? Visually, we never do. He's very clearly isolated in his own panels, which limit the horizontal space, and so they start to feel very confined and very cramped. Even in that wide panel I mentioned previously at the top of page 2, he's actually rendered inside of a box. He's trapped, emotionally and physically, within that frame within the frame. And Tempest adds a bit more to his page too by colouring it all basically in one tone, this purple. Sure, the Professor has on brown clothes, but actually it's this purple, a cool, calm colour that sits over the page. It's not as dynamic as the oranges that come into play later on in other sequences, and it gives these pages a sort of drab wash. It's not exciting, it's not screaming at your eye to look at how dynamic it is, it's just there. It all reflects this Professor and what he's talking about, which brings us more to Cott's writing. Here on the second page, the Professor mentions, "The price is our imagination." That's reflective of the approach Tempest takes during the page as well, because this is a very standard set of visuals, and nothing else is really rendered here. These pages feel particularly drab in comparison to the next set of pages, which follow a new narrative, for example. Placing them side by side, you can see how repetitive that Professor face, then crowd, style of drawing the page is super limiting. Now that might sound a bit negative, but it's all clearly designed that way to create that sensation. Similarly, when Cott has the Professor talk about limiting a worldview in the middle row of the second page, what do we see? It's 3 panels of nothing. Well, in fact, it's the same image 3 times. The audience is nothing but a loose sketch. Even the person here we see in this brown colour that we previously saw at the bottom of the first page, even they are pretty loose. It's about creating the idea of people from the perspective of this Professor. As the story goes on and we learn more about him, it's actually a really clever way of presenting him and the way he sees the world. He sees these people, as in he acknowledges that there are people there, he doesn't really see them, they're just the massive bodies he talks at. And again, that's an important detail that's easy to pick up from the character as Cott writes him, and there's another excellent moment of characterization in these pages. This student speaks up and says something of a differing viewpoint than the Professor has. And in all of the previous speech balloons, we've never seen an exclamation mark, until the second page in the middle panel. It coincides with a student leaving, and suddenly the Professor is shouting. His speech bubbles drop in the frame, which gives a sense of his voice fading, and we understand this man a little better. Here, he is physically driving people away, and the next panel shows us him, small, weak, and importantly, alone. This is masterful use of the medium. In 2 pages we've got so much about his character and so much beyond the surface as well. We can see how this person operates in the world quite dramatically, and really what kind of person they are. And it quickly and exactly creates the sense of isolation I mentioned at the top of the episode. That combination of framing, the colouring, writing, and character design is all working together to drive home this idea, and it's clear to see how meshed Cott and Tempest are in making this happen. It's the beauty of a collaborative medium working in full effect. And most impressive to me is how much of this is done silently, under the surface. It doesn't hit you over the head with the idea, it just conveys it with very little fanfare. This is restrained and intelligent art, I would say, that knows exactly what it's aiming to do and achieves just that. Our material is full of clever work like this. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy Strip Panel Naked, we'd love your support at patreon.com/strippanelnaked, where in return you'll get access to exclusive articles, previews, and over 100 comic page annotations updated weekly. There's way more to come. You can follow me at Hassanawi on Twitter to get more comic thoughts and analysis and weekly page annotations for various things I'm reading. And this episode was of course edited by the awesome UC Quiche, who usually posts a preview on Twitter for the episodes he's editing, and you know what, he always loves some feedback from you guys. So see you next time.